All right, chapter 10-1 talks about a Republican taking office, and the Republican is Thomas Jefferson. And if you remember from previous lessons, Thomas Jefferson had been John Adams, who was a Federalist, vice president. So we had a president from one party and a vice president from another party. So in the election of 1800, John Adams, unfortunately for him, is not reelected, and Thomas Jefferson, the Republican, takes office. So you see this smooth transition of power from one party to the other. All right. Thomas Jefferson's interesting, though. On the day of his inauguration, he didn't have a fancy ceremony. He actually was staying in a boarding house. He walked. He didn't have a carriage. He walked to the nation's capital, gave a speech. It was pretty, in fact, it was kind of unimpressive. Most people couldn't even hear it. And then after the ceremony, he walked back to the boarding house. He gets to the boarding house where he also is going to have his dinner. Nobody even stands up and recognizes him. So what does this demonstrate? It demonstrates, he is not into pomp and circumstances, even though he's wealthy and from an educated and respectable family. He doesn't buy into all that ceremony and pomp and circumstance that the president gives, or president usually receives. So that should tell you a little something about Thomas Jefferson. Okay, so when Jefferson takes office, he's going to make sure it brings his democratic style. And he's determined to make the government more democratic. Remember, under the Federalists believed that only the wealthy and the educated should rule the people. Well, Jefferson and his party believes that all people should have the same rights. But remember, I don't think he's talking about uneducated people or people that don't understand anything. He actually wrote a letter to James Madison telling him to educate the people, so that they have a say in the government. Okay, so what's his plan? His plan is to lessen the power of the federal government. If you remember about the Democratic Republicans, they believe in strong state power. They do not believe in a strong federal government. Okay? So he wants to reduce the power of the federal government. He also wants to reduce the federal budget, including the military. This is going to come back and bite him. All right? Now, his economic idea is a French word. It's called laissez-faire, which means let alone, laissez-faire. He thinks the government should play as little or as small a role as possible in economic policies. Remember, under the Federalists, they believed in manufacturing and trade. They also were in favor of protective tariffs to increase the price on imported goods so the American products would be more attractive. Not cheaper, but more attractive. Okay? But Jefferson's going to get away from some of those policies, and he thinks the government should play as little or as small a role as possible. Okay, so some other things. Let's get back to this decreasing of the federal government and the power. He decreased the size of the federal departments. So he lays off people. He makes these departments smaller. And again, he decreases the military budget. Remember John Adams, when he was faced with the British and the French seizing our ships, instead of going to war, he spent money. He spent money on defense. He built frigates, which kept us out of war with France, which is a good deal. Jefferson is going to decrease the military budget. All right? So we'll see how that works out. He's going to repeal the unpopular whiskey tax, which makes him very popular with Westerners and small farmers. Remember, because they're going to make a lot of their money converting the corn they grow into whiskey, which is more profitable for him. So repealing this tax is a good thing for his popularity. He's also going to pardon those in jail due to the Sedition Act. Remember, this is the one that John Adams really kind of messed up on. You could be put in jail if you say anything negative about a government official or the government itself, and people are put in jail, including newspapermen. So he's going to pardon those in jail, which is a good deal. All right? And finally, he's going to ask Congress to allow aliens, remember people who have come to the United States, they don't have citizenship, to apply for that citizenship after 5 years. Remember, under John Adams with the Alien and Sedition Act, he was going to make them wait for 14 years. Again, this is smart in two ways. Number one, a lot of these people that are coming to the United States seeking citizenship are farmers and craftspeople. They're certainly not rich merchants coming to the United States to seek citizenship. So this is going to be popular with the people, and it's really going to be popular for his party, the Democratic Republican Party. All right? So some of those things he does to make it a less active government. Oh, one other thing I should say before we move on, though, is Jefferson didn't get rid of all the Federalist policies. Okay? I think I mentioned that in the last lesson. Jefferson, listening to some of his advisors, decides to keep the Bank of the United States. Even though, remember, the Republicans felt that the Bank of the United States was unconstitutional. Jefferson takes power and realizes, we do need this bank. Okay, so he keeps that. He also makes sure that he continues Alexander Hamilton's policy of paying off the federal debt, including the state debt that the government had taken on behalf of the states. All right? In addition, Jefferson didn't walk in and just clean house. He didn't fire, or you're a Federalist, you're fired. No. Many Federalists actually do end up keeping their jobs. So even though he's going to decrease the size of the federal government, he is not going to just make wholesale changes. He's actually pretty smart about this. The Bank of the United States is probably a good idea. All right? And certainly paying off the debt is going to be a good idea. Because if we don't pay off these debts, we're going to look like welchers and nobody's going to trust us. And good luck ever getting a loan from another country. All right? So there you have it. Okay, so now we need to talk about a very important Supreme Court case called Marbury versus Madison. Let me give you some background. Okay, so when Jefferson takes office, the Republicans have the executive branch. They also get the legislative branch. They have more power in the House and the Senate than do the Federalists. However, the Federalists still control the courts. All right. Now, before Jefferson was inaugurated, remember the election's in November, but back in this time, you don't take office till March. So you have December, January, February, the old president's still there. And the Federalists in the old Congress increased the number of judges on the federal court, right? So they're going to stuff the federal courts with all the Federalists they can. President Adams then appointed Federalists to fill the new positions. Okay, now, let's see what happens next. One of the judges was John Marshall. John Marshall is going to become the Chief Justice. John Marshall, Chief Justice. Now, John Marshall is interesting. He's from Virginia. He's wealthy. He's rich. He's from an important family, kind of like Jefferson. However, unlike Jefferson, he is a staunch Federalist. He believes that there should be a strong federal government. Okay, now, in 1803, John Adams appoints a guy named William Marbury on the very last night of his presidency. So John Adams, the next day he's leaving office, okay? By the way, John Adams left office, he was kind of a sore loser. He didn't even show up to Jefferson's inauguration. He kind of just sneaks out of the Capitol, kind of a sore loser. But anyways, on the night before he leaves, though, he appoints one more judge, William Marbury. Okay? Now, Jefferson is super ticked off about this. He orders his Secretary of State, and that is James Madison, not to give him his official papers. You might be appointed, but if you have not received your official documents, then you cannot become a federal judge. Okay? So Jefferson orders Madison not to give William Marbury the official paperwork making him a judge. So Marbury sues James Madison. All right? Now, here's the rub. The Judiciary Act of 1789 said that only, if a federal official sued another federal official, then the case had to be heard in the Supreme Court. Let's see what happens. Okay. Like I said before in this last slide, the Judiciary Act of 1789 said only Supreme Court could decide cases when a federal official is sued. Okay, I already said that. All right. So what does the Supreme Court decide? And this is what's important. Marshall rules against Marbury, which is surprising. He's a Federalist. You'd think he was going to put a Federalist on the court, but he rules against him. But he goes one step further, and this is the important piece. Marshall and the Supreme Court ruled that the Judiciary Act of 1789 was unconstitutional. That's right. He said the Constitution did not give the Supreme Court the power to decide cases against government officials. Therefore, Congress could not simply just pass a law saying, okay, we're going to pass a law saying Supreme Court's going to do this. No, that violates the Constitution. So the Supreme Court says the Judiciary Act of 1789 is unconstitutional, and they throw out that law. All right? Okay, so this is called judicial review. And Marbury versus Madison set an important precedent. Okay? The Supreme Court can decide if a law passed by the Congress is constitutional or not. And if it's not constitutional, doesn't matter if the Congress passed it, if the president signed it into law. If it is determined to be unconstitutional, the Supreme Court can get rid of it. Okay? This is called judicial review, and it gave more power to the Supreme Court, kind of for the first time balancing the three branches. All right? Now, Jefferson's furious. Jefferson, how dare the Supreme Court, these six guys deciding, laws passed by our representatives are constitutional or not, they're turning tyrannical. No, they're doing the right thing. They are being impartial, hopefully, looking at the laws passed by Congress and determining if they're constitutional or not. Okay, and that is what judicial review is. All right? So there you have it. This is what I'm going to leave you today. Jefferson's in office. Jefferson is changing a lot of the Federalist policies, and we've talked about judicial review in the case of Marbury versus Madison. All right? There you have it. See you later.